The Rebel Capitalist Show.
Is gold the North Star? I mean, is that how you see it? And what can, I mean, I'm assuming one thing that people can do to protect themselves from whatever is happening in the future, or maybe they could have done in Russia if it would have been legal, is to actually own gold. I mean, is that something that we can hang on to? And how do you see gold to the framework, having the experiences that we've just gone over?
Well, the question is, so first of all, the way I came to gold is not through gold. The way I came to gold is by asking all these questions
Right.
that you and I are talking about, and then asking a question in the wake of that. So, okay, so if there's a non-trivial, means more than 1 in a million, if there's a real chance that this system has to get reorganized,
Mm.
then what will survive? Okay, well, of course, all real assets will survive. Property will survive, land will survive, Picassos will survive, Rembrandts will survive, diamonds will survive, copper ore will survive, warehouses filled with whatever, lithium will survive, all that survives. The question is who owns it, at what price, and all that. The reason I came to gold out of all that is because gold happens to be the only financial asset that is also a tangible asset. There are many tangible assets. They will all survive. But not all of them are practical to own. I mean, warehouses with copper is not something a normal person can maintain, and it's complicated and difficult and whatever. So the way gold emerged as what it is because it is very valuable per unit of volume. So you can concentrate a significant amount of value in a fairly small physical space, right? It's very dense. It's 19 times denser than water. It's genuinely rare. So you cannot print more gold. You cannot even find more gold. It takes 10 years to get the mine going from discovery to production. So it's inelastic. The supply is highly inelastic. The most important thing about gold is A, it's scarce. B, of course, it's permanent, meaning it's a molecular structure that humans cannot rearrange. So it's just there. But the most important thing is it's independent. It doesn't have a counterpart. See, everything you and I are talking here about is counterparty risk, because all of the players in this constellation, and that includes crypto world, because there has to be miners, there has to be electricity, there has to be access to electricity at a regular price. Right. You have to have access to the internet. Internet service provider has to allow certain data packets to go through. I mean, there's a lot behind the scenes in the networks that is people think is like free world there, but it's not totally a free world. And the whole infrastructure, for example, for Bitcoin mining, I mean, it has to exist and continue to be feasible and to exist for the asset to have value. Nothing has to exist for gold to be what it is. Mm. Nothing. You can have a coin in your pocket. Of course, if you store it in a warehouse, there has to be some infrastructure. But you can then withdraw it from the warehouse, dig it into ground, and keep it there for 100 years, and it doesn't matter. It's going to be the same 100 years later. That property of gold is not very highly valued because it sounds like very big deal, like this is total out there thinking. But the desire for an asset that doesn't have a counterparty and is completely independent from the financial system, from all kinds of systems, portable, can be kept, at a house, can be kept in a foreign country, can be kept wherever, and doesn't spoil. Nothing happens to it. That desire is inversely correlated to confidence in counterparties, financial arrangements, property rights. Right. In other words, the infrastructure of life, of society, the rules that we take for granted, that they are there, right? And so you can think of gold as an asset. It's not a deflation hedge. It's not this or that or the other. It's not what anything people think about it. What it is, it's an independent store of value whose value is highest when the risk of everything else is also high. And demand for it is highest when the risk of everything else is high. So it has this quality of an insurance policy that performs when things go bad in some way. When things are going great and in bubbles, gold is not attractive to people because they can make a lot more money doing something else, speculating. That's why people like Warren Buffett don't like and understand gold, because people like Warren Buffett and investors in general, you can think about them as capitalists whose means of production is money. So they're using money to make more money. That's the activity in which they're engaged. It's a risk-taking activity, and that's what they're doing. That's not saving. That's risk-taking. Saving is simply setting aside purchasing power in a format that will reliably deliver the same purchasing power to you later. Nobody's looking to make profits on their savings account. We used to have savings account where the interest rate was higher than inflation, so you could actually keep up a little bit. So gold is that. And that's why Warren Buffett doesn't understand gold. So what's there to, because it's not means of production. It's just, it's a fallow asset. It doesn't do anything with it. Precisely.
And I think
it's
that's
not supposed to do anything.
Exactly. And I think that's why most people don't understand it, is because of the recency bias that we kind of hardwired into our head. And that story going back to 1916 in Russia, how 800 years changed just over a weekend. I mean, that in and of itself is the reason you own gold. Because, what's the saying that they have? It's something that there can be 10 years where not very much happens, and then one day where 10 years happens all at once. I mean, that's why you own gold.
So that revolution, the first revolution, happened in 72 hours. The one in the fall that completely changed the world, the Russian world and world for everybody, took 10 days. So John Reed, an American who was in Russia at the time, wrote a book, 10 Days That Changed the World. There's a movie with Warren Beatty, 10 Days That Changed the World. So yes, everything can go very quickly. And when preconditions are in place, and I believe preconditions are in place, and we've just described some of them, and there are plenty more, it's simply imprudent, and it's irresponsible, I would say, to not make some provisions for contingency plans.
Right.
And people are not used to it. People insure their cars, people insure their houses, people insure everything. They don't insure their savings. Have you noticed? There's no concept of, well, I need to pay a certain amount to insure my savings, my capital. Okay, so if you're a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, I mean, maybe you can make it back. But if you're in your 50s or 60s, you can't make it back. And that's where people are ready for retirement, but they have the most amount of savings, and they're most interested in making even more instead of trying to protect what they have. That's I think is the issue. And maybe that's lack of understanding, that's lack of, it's a post-war time frame when there has not been a systemic crisis in the West since World War II. But if you just dial back in another 30, 40 years, oh my God, I mean, just look at the 20s and 30s, even in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a disaster.
Yeah.
The 30s were a disaster in this country.
Yeah, and I think another reason is because people have been forced into that speculative mindset, with stocks as an example, because of the bezel you were talking about earlier in the form of inflation. When you were talking about that bezel, that's the first, and when you were describing it, that's the first thing that came into my mind was inflation. That the government is picking your pocket. People don't consciously realize it. The only thing they know is that they have to buy some sort of asset that goes up at 15, 20, 30% per year just to try to get ahead. Therefore, they look at gold and it seems unattractive in that light.
And it isn't attractive in that light because there's no experience with real disruptions, right, where claims where suddenly your bank account is not there. I mean, think of what happened in the 1930s. I mean, cash was king. Cash was king, except nobody had cash. Why didn't they have cash? Because their cash was in the bank. Where was the bank? Bust.
Yeah, counterparty, right.
That's right, counterparty risk. So, they had bonds. My grandparents had bonds. So what? The government defaulted on the bonds.
Yeah.
So maybe those governments won't default on the bonds outright, So maybe they're trying to inflate. They're trying to pay you back in future dollars, which are buying a lot less. See, this is why gold has had this history. It's the most boring thing in the world. It doesn't do anything. It sits there. But boy, it buys that ounce of gold, just keeps buying the same thing. Yeah, there are times when it buys less, and there are times when it buys a lot more. Usually it buys less in booms, and it buys a lot more in busts. But over time, it just buys the same thing. And that's a very valuable property. It's just people don't put a lot of value on it.